I was abandoned in a strange city with an empty purse, but a wallet dropped on the sidewalk changed my fate. The owner didn't just repay me, he dragged my family's truth into the light and became my lawyer. When the court announced the verdict, my son looked at me for the first time in years. What made him collapse wasn't the sentence. It was the evidence that came from his own home. My name is Eleanor Hart. I am 62 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I was the head treasurer at the Northwind Civic Trust. I balanced books to the penny. I managed endowments. I was trusted. I was precise. And I was solvent. Which is why the humid Charleston air felt like such a specific kind of slap. I had arrived from Cleveland the night before, an invitation from my son, Caleb, and his wife, Veronica, to visit family. The words had sounded stiff, corporate even, coming from Caleb's mouth over the phone, but I had clung to them. Hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. For the past few years, I had been living in the margins of my own life. It started slowly after my husband passed. Caleb, my only child, began to help. First, it was just advice on my investments. Then he suggested we consolidate accounts, just to make things easier to manage. My name, which had been on every mortgage and utility bill for 30 years, began to quietly disappear from paperwork. I was no longer consulted on major expenditures. I was informed after the fact. When I questioned it, Caleb would sigh, that long, suffering sound he'd perfected. Mom, Veronica and I are in this world. We understand the tax implications. Just let us handle it. I was a treasurer. I understood numbers better than he ever did. But I was also a mother, and I had been taught that trust was the currency of family. I had given it, even when my gut screamed that I was being overdrawn. The flight down was the final, silent signal. Caleb and Veronica were in business class. I was in economy, row 28, seat B, the middle seat. We have to work. Mum, Veronica had explained, her smile not reaching her eyes as they boarded ahead of me. The Wi-Fi is just better up there, through the entire flight. Neither of them walked back to see if I needed water. We didn't go to their home. We went to a budget hotel near the interstate, the kind with thin carpets and paintings bolted to the wall. Just for tonight, Caleb said, avoiding my gaze. Our place is having some plumbing work done. Total mess. They got 2 rooms. One for them, one for me. We'll have a great day tomorrow. Mum, Caleb said, handing me a plastic key card. Get some rest. We'll go for a walk. See the city. The promise of tomorrow let me sleep. I woke with the sun, the unfamiliar sounds of highway traffic bleeding through the window. I dressed in the simple cotton slacks and blouse I'd worn for travel. 8 o'clock passed, then 9. At 9:30, I walked the short distance down the hall and knocked on their door, first lightly, then with more force. Caleb, Veronica, silence. A cold, chemical dread started to seep into my stomach. I returned to my room. My purse was on the small desk. I opened it. My wallet was gone. My cell phone was gone. My driver's license, my credit cards, my Medicare card. All gone. My mind immediately replayed the night before. Caleb at my door, his hand out. Hey, Mum, let me grab your wallet and phone. I need to confirm our return tickets and your ID for the hotel system. I'll bring it right back. He had smiled. I had handed it over. I fumbled with the hotel room phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to dial the front desk twice. Hello? I said, my voice a dry croak. I'm in room 214. Can you tell me if my son, Caleb Hart, in room 212, is there? The clerk's voice was bored, practiced. Ma'am, that room is vacant. The guests checked out at 6:05 this morning. No, that must be a mistake. They're my family. No mistake. Ma'am. They checked out. A pause. And I see your room. 214. Was only paid for one night. Checkout was 10 minutes ago. You have about 20 minutes to vacate before we have to charge for late departure. The phone slipped from my fingers. I was pushed out onto the hot pavement 20 minutes later, carrying nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a small, useless room key. The sun was bright, blinding. The shame was a physical weight, a layer of grime I couldn't scrub off. I stood on the curb of a city I did not know, with no money, no name, and no way home. A single, cold thought cut through the panic. I will survive this, and I will remember everything. I walked. There was nothing else to do. I had no destination. No purpose other than to put one foot in front of the other and prove I was still moving. The Charleston sun was bright, the kind that feels heavy and wet, a port city's welcome. It glinted off cobblestone streets that were uneven and treacherous, meant for carriages, not a woman in shock. The sounds were all wrong. In Cleveland, I knew the rumble of the RTA, the specific rhythm of the city. Here, there were strange, sweet-smelling breezes from the water and, somewhere in the distance, the heavy, melodic tolling of church bells. They sounded accusing, as if marking my disgrace with every chime. I was searching for a familiar shadow in a city where I knew no one. Hours passed. The humidity wilted my blouse, and the shame clung to me, heavier than the air. I finally found a small, wrought-iron bench in a sliver of a park, shaded by a massive, moss-draped oak. It faced a busy street and, across it, a bright, inviting cafe with large glass windows. People sat inside, laughing, their heads bent over laptops and porcelain cups. They were living their lives. I was watching. My hand dove into the pocket of my old spring coat, a habit from a life where I always had bus fare. My fingers closed around the last remnants of my old identity. I pulled them out. 1 quarter, 2 dimes, a nickel, and 3 pennies. 53 cents. Not enough for a bus. Not enough for a coffee. Not even enough to make a phone call. If I could find a payphone and someone to call. I closed my fist around the coins, the metal biting into my palm. I must have been staring at the cafe, or at nothing at all, when it happened. A man, talking animatedly into his phone via earbuds, rushed out of a taxi and hoisted a dark backpack onto his shoulder. As he swung it, the zipper on a side pocket, which was not quite closed, caught, and a small, dark object flew out. It was a man's leather wallet. It landed softly on the pavement just a few feet from the curb, unnoticed. The man, already hailing another car, jumped in, and the car pulled away. I sat, frozen. The wallet lay there, looking vulnerable. My first thought was for the man. My second, burning thought was for the cash that was surely inside. I looked around. No one else had seen. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sick, frantic beat. I could take it. I could take the cash and buy a bus ticket, buy some food. Who would know my legs were moving before I made a conscious decision? I stood up, my knees weak, and crossed the few feet of pavement. I picked it up. It was heavy, made of soft, expensive leather. My hands, The same hands that had balanced million-dollar accounts were shaking. I opened it. Inside, there was a frighteningly thick sheaf of cash, mostly 20s and 50s. There was a black, exclusive-looking membership card for something called the South Battery Club. There was a family photo, a smiling woman, and 2 teenagers on a boat. And tucked in its own slot, a crisp, cream-coloured business card. It read, Graham Whitlow, Esquire, attorney at law. My conscience, buried under the panic, finally spoke. This was a man's life, his identification, his family. Returning it was the only option. But how if I walked up to his office, looking like this dishevelled, desperate, a 62-year-old vagrant, I would be turned away at the door. My eyes fell on the cafe across the street. I took a deep breath, clutching the wallet to my chest, and walked into the air conditioning. A young woman with bright green hair looked up from the espresso machine. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but wary. I found this just now. Outside. I held up the wallet. It belongs to a man named Graham Whitlow. His business card is inside. I was wondering, could you possibly call the number for me? I don't have a phone. The barista's eyes narrowed, taking in my wrinkled clothes, my frantic energy. She was skeptical. I'm sure I looked like I was part of a scam. "Please," I whispered. "I just want to return it to him." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But I'm putting it on speaker." She punched the number from the card into the cafe's phone and hit the speaker button. It rang twice. "Whitlow." A voice barked, sounding impatient. Hi," the barista said, suddenly nervous. "I'm calling from the Daily Grind. There's a woman here. She says she found your wallet." There was a sharp intake of breath on the line, followed by a curse. "I'm on my way. Don't let her leave. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He was there in 5. The bell on the cafe door jangled, and a man in his late 50s strode in. He had salt and pepper hair, and his grey suit jacket was rumpled, as if he'd thrown it on in a hurry. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me, the only person not holding a coffee. He walked straight to the counter. The wallet. I held it out. He took it, his eyes sharp, assessing me. He didn't open it to check the cash. Instead, he flipped to a small, hidden pocket I hadn't even seen. "What was in this compartment?" he asked, his voice low and testing. I thought back to my brief inspection. I didn't see a compartment. I saw the money, the club card, a photo of a family on a boat, and your business card. "No," he said, his gaze fixed on mine, behind the family photo. What was there? My mind raced. I had seen something, hadn't I? A ticket, a folded ticket stub, from a play. It was blue. His entire posture changed. The tension left his shoulders. He let out a long breath and finally, truly, looked at me. He nodded. A formal, deep gesture of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. He began to pull the cash out, presumably to give me a reward. But my hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter. A small, red scrape on my wrist, from where I'd stumbled on the uneven curb earlier, was visible. He stopped, his own hand hovering over the money. His sharp, lawyer's eyes missed nothing. "Are you all right?" he asked. His question hung in the air, simple and direct. The dam of my composure, already cracked by the morning's events, finally broke. I could not stop the words, though they came out in a halting, humiliating whisper. I was left here, I said, my gaze dropping to the floor tiles. I have no identification, no phone. My son took them. Graham Whitlow's expression didn't change. There was no pity, no shock, just a quiet intensity. He put his wallet, the one I had just returned, into his inner suit pocket. He turned to the barista, who was watching with wide eyes. Add a pot of black coffee and whatever your best breakfast sandwich is to my bill, he said. He then looked back at me. Please, sit with me. Let me buy you a hot meal. I recoiled slightly. I couldn't possibly accept Mom. He interrupted, his voice kind but firm. You just saved me from cancelling 12 credit cards and a flight to Boston. Accepting a $10 sandwich isn't about charity. Favors are how the world works. You did one for me? I'm doing one for you. He gestured to a small table in the corner, and I, feeling utterly empty, followed. The food arrived, and the smell of the hot coffee made me realize I was starving. I ate slowly, mechanically, while he watched, not eating himself, just sipping his coffee. He let the silence sit until I had finished half the sandwich. Start from the beginning, he said. My name is Graham. Eleanor Hart. And I told him about my life in Cleveland, about my 35 years at the Northwind Civic Trust, how I had managed the pensions of 600 people. I told him about my husband dying too young, a heart attack at 49, leaving me to raise Caleb on my own. I had poured everything into that boy, every penny I saved, every ounce of strength. He was my life's great work. He was a good son. I insisted, hearing the defensive tremble in my own voice. He was, until he met Veronica. Graham just nodded, his gaze steady. She works in high-end real estate or venture capital. I was never quite sure. It was all about opportunities and leveraging assets. Caleb, he wanted that life so badly. He started dressing differently, talking differently. He stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Eleanor in meetings. I paused, gathering the strength for the worst part. About 2 years ago, Caleb came to me. He said my finances were a mess. He said I wasn't optimized for retirement. He had a stack of papers, a whole binder, thick as a phone book. He called it temporary authorization, just to help him streamline my accounts. He said, to protect my assets. And you signed it, Graham stated. It wasn't a question. I signed it. I whispered. He's my son. I trusted him. The aftermath was a slow erosion. First, my online banking portal stopped working. A security glitch, Caleb said. Then the paper statements stopped coming. We're going green, Mom. It's all digital now. I owned my small apartment, the one I'd bought with my husband. One day, a letter came addressed to the resident. My name was no longer on the deed. When I confronted him, he said it was part of the trust, to protect it from taxes. But I couldn't access the trust. My voice broke. Last month, he moved me out of my apartment. He said they needed to sell it to fund a new investment. He moved me into their house, into a small room in the basement, next to the furnace. It was a storage room. He and Veronica told me it was just until they found me a proper assisted living place. They regulated my meals. They told me when I could and couldn't use the main living room. I was a servant. And this trip, Graham asked, his voice quiet. Veronica called it a reconciliation trip, a chance to heal. They were so nice for 3 days before we left. They promised me we'd see the historic houses, that we'd have a real vacation. It was a lie. They just needed to get me out of Ohio. They just needed to dump me. I had finished my story. I was empty, humiliated by the telling of it. Graham Whitlow had not moved. He hadn't flinched or gasped. He had simply listened. On a small, leather-bound notepad he'd pulled from his pocket, he had written down maybe 5 or 6 words, dates, mostly. He looked at his watch, then back at me. The assessing look was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in a very long time: professional focus. He reached into his suit, pulled out his wallet again, and extracted a fresh business card. He slid it across the table. It was the same one I'd seen an hour before. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping. "I am a civil and probate litigation attorney. That means I specialize in property disputes, contested wills, and financial fraud." He leaned in slightly. "What you've described isn't a family dispute. It's a textbook case of elder abuse and fraudulent conveyance. I want you to tell me everything you remember about those papers you signed. Every word. Every stray mark. Show me what you remember." We were still at the cafe table, the remnants of my breakfast between us, but the atmosphere had transformed. It was no longer a space of comfort. It had become a war room. Graham took out his phone. His movements were precise, economical. "Sarah, I need you," he said, his voice devoid of any previous warmth. "I am sending you a name and an address. Eleanor Hart, an apartment in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. I need a full public records pull, title, liens, and any transfers in the last 24 months. I want to know who owns that property. Now." He looked at me. The address I recited, the address of the home I had shared with my husband, the home I had raised Caleb in. He repeated it to his assistant. We waited. It was not a long time, perhaps only 3 minutes, but the air in the cafe felt thin. I watched the traffic outside, every passing car a potential threat. His phone buzzed on the table. He didn't pick it up. He just read the screen, his jaw tightening. He turned the phone so I could see the text. "Current owner, Hart Ridge LLC. "I don't understand." I said. "What is Hart Ridge?" "It's a shell company," Graham said, his voice flat and hard. "A legal entity created to hide ownership. Keep reading." I looked closer. Date of transfer: May 14th, 2 years ago, the week I signed the binder. Just 2 days after I signed those papers. I whispered, "Sarah." Graham spoke to the phone again, his eyes fixed on me. "Who is the registered agent or manager for Hart Ridge LLC?" A new message appeared almost instantly. "Manager Veronica Hale, my daughter-in-law." The room tilted. It wasn't just Caleb. It was Veronica, too. This wasn't negligence or a son's misguided attempt to manage money. This was a conspiracy. "There's one more piece," Graham said, already anticipating my next question. "Sarah, pull the notary on that deed transfer." The name came back, Miles Brody. Graham let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh, but it held no humor. "Brody. Of course. It's Brody. You know him, I know of him," Graham said, finally looking away from the phone and meeting my gaze. "He's a cut-rate notary. He has 6 complaints filed against him for procedural violations, notarizing documents without the signatory present, backdating, you name it. He's sloppy. He's the kind of man you hire when you need a signature, and the person signing isn't going to be in the room. He is their vulnerability. He leaned forward, and the kindness in his eyes was now sharpened by a prosecutor's focus. Eleanor, here is what this means. This is not a family dispute. The documentation on your phone screen strongly suggests felony-level crimes, fraudulent conveyance, likely forgery, and textbook financial elder abuse. They didn't just move your assets, they stole your home. This trip to Charleston was to get rid of me. I finished. Was to ensure you were out of state, unidentified, and without resources while the transactions cooled. He corrected me, his voice precise. They timed it. So what do we do? My voice was shaking, but not from fear. From a cold, unfamiliar rage, we strike first, and we strike hard. Graham said. He stood, dropping a $20 bill on the table. My office is 3 blocks away. We are walking there right now, and my team will draft an emergency petition. We are asking a judge, this afternoon, for a temporary restraining order, a TRO. We will ask to have every asset held by Hart Ridge LLC frozen, effective immediately. We cut off their access to your money before they can wire it somewhere else. The panic returned. But I have nothing. Graham, I have no identification. I have no proof of who I am. I'm just a woman you found. How can I petition a court? You are not just a woman, he said, his voice absolute. You are my client, and you have me. He held his hand out, not in kindness, but in partnership. I took it. Our first stop isn't the courthouse, he said as we burst out onto the bright street. It's the Charleston Civil Society office. I have a contact there who handles emergency aid and displaced persons. They can interface with the Ohio DMV, pull your records remotely, and issue a temporary, state-certified identification card today. You cannot sue without legal standing, and you cannot have standing until we prove you are Eleanor Hart. As we walked, he made one more call. His tone softened just a fraction. Yes, I need a room. A quiet one. Please. For 1 week. It will be prepaid on my personal card. Thank you. He hung up. I've booked you a room at a small hotel near my office. It's safe. It's clean. Graham, I cannot accept. I have no way to pay you for any of this. He stopped me on the sidewalk, forcing me to look at him. Eleanor, this is no longer a favor. This is the cost of doing business. We will settle the bill when we get your assets back. But you cannot fight a war if you are worried about where you will sleep. You need to rest. Because tomorrow, we begin. I stood there. The sounds of the port city washing around me. The church bells began to ring again, marking the hour. I had not cried when Caleb took my wallet. I had not cried when the clerk told me my room was paid for only 1 night. I had been too numb. But standing on that sunny sidewalk, looking at this stranger who was offering me not just a bed, but a sword, I cried. It was not a cry of sadness. It was the sharp, painful intake of breath after being underwater for too long. For the first time in years. Someone was on my side. My new hotel room was clean, anonymous, and blessedly quiet. But I hadn't slept. I was in Graham's office by 7 a.m., fueled by coffee and a cold, clarifying anger. We had filed the emergency petition. The TRO was granted. A temporary shield. Now, Graham said. We needed the sword. We sat across from each other at his large, polished desk. His assistant, Sarah, was on a speakerphone. Eleanor. They will claim this was all a misunderstanding. Graham began, his voice methodical. They will say you were confused, that you agreed to this. We have to prove intent. I need you to go back to the day you signed that binder, that stack of papers Caleb brought you. Do you remember any small detail? A coffee stain, the color of the pen. I closed my eyes, summoning the image of my basement room, the smell of damp concrete and laundry detergent. Caleb, pacing, looking at his watch. So many pages. I murmured. He just kept pushing them at me. Sign here, sign here. But the end, the very last page, it was separate. The notary's page. My eyes snapped open. It was attached with a paperclip, a bright blue plastic one, and there was a sticky note on it, a yellow one. What did it say? Graham asked, leaning in. Just 2 words. Make it clean? And a signature, not a name, just an initial, a letter V. It was very sharp, very stylized, an italic V. Graham looked at the speakerphone. Sarah. On it. Her voice replied. We heard the rapid clack of a keyboard. Veronica Hale. She has a very active professional networking profile. She posts articles about wealth management. Oh, here it is. She was a guest speaker for an online seminar last month. The marketing graphic she posted has a handwritten note scrawled on it. A very exciting opportunity? She signed it with just the V. A moment later, a file appeared in Graham's email. He opened it. There, on a glossy advertisement, was the same sharp, italic V. A perfect match. Make it clean, Graham said, the words hanging in the air. She wasn't just signing off. She was giving the notary, Miles Brodie, an instruction. So we have her handwriting? I said. But how do we prove it with their own arrogance? Graham said. Sarah. Dig into Brodie. But I want to pivot. Eleanor. The house. Their house in Cleveland. What kind of security did they have? Everything, I said. Caleb was obsessed, especially the front door. A smart lock. He used his phone or a code. He bragged that it kept a log of every single time the door was opened or closed, down to the second. Sarah. Prepare a subpoena for the data logs from that lock provider for the past 6 months, Graham commanded. We'll see exactly how often our client was allowed to leave the house. He then turned back to me. And your apartment. When they moved you out. Who saw it? My neighbor, I said instantly. Mrs. Duffy. Apartment 302. She's lived there for 30 years. She sees everything from her peephole. She never trusted Veronica. Graham muted the speakerphone and dialed a new number, putting it on his desk speaker. He charmed Mrs. Duffy in under 60 seconds. Oh, Mr. Whitlow. It was a disgrace, Mrs. Duffy's voice crackled. I saw them, that Veronica, marching around like she owned the place, pointing, and Caleb just standing there. They had a big moving truck, and they were just dumping Eleanor's things into boxes. Not wrapping, just dumping. Mrs. Duffy, Graham said, his voice smooth as silk. You wouldn't happen to have one of those doorbell cameras, would you? A Ring camera? Of course I do. Catches the whole hallway. I got the footage of that truck and those movers right here on my phone. Graham's smile was triumphant. We are sending a courier to you immediately. He hung up and looked at Sarah on the speakerphone. Sarah. Any luck with Brodie more than luck? Sir? She said, her voice tight with excitement. Brodie has been sued before, last year, for improper notarization. The plaintiff uploaded discovery documents to a public forum, complaining. I'm looking at one right now. It's an email from Brodie to that plaintiff's lawyer. And Graham said, He wrote, "Your client was too busy to sign, so I just filled it in for her to move things along." "Sir," he admitted his methods. "In writing," Graham clicked his pen. "Good. Now, the money. I found a $35,000 payment from Ms. Hale to the South Battery Club 2 weeks ago." He turned to me. "That's my club, the one I'm a member of. She was trying to buy her way in, using my money to pay her initiation fee." He looked back at the phone. "Sarah, find the $185,000 that went to Caleb. Already found it." "Sir," she said. He moved it from Hart Ridge LLC to his personal checking account, and then used it as a down payment on a boat. The Sweet V, he called it. Graham steepled his fingers, and for the first time, I saw a truly cold smile on his face. A smart locklog, a nosy neighbor with a camera, a boastful, idiotic notary, and a stolen boat. The pieces aren't just fitting. Eleanor, they're building a cage. It wasn't just theft. It was a clear, deliberate, and provable plan to remove me from my own life. We flew back to Cleveland the next morning. Graham had arranged it all. We were not in Charleston to hide. We were there to be disposed of. Now. We were taking the fight to them. We didn't drive to my old apartment, or to a hotel. We drove to Shoreline Estates. The name was new. A sprawling development of oversized houses built too close together. All beige stucco and 3-car garages. It was the house my money had paid for. Graham held a thick manila envelope. I held my temporary ID card, the plastic still feeling sharp in my hand. We walked up the curved stone path. Graham rang the doorbell. We heard it chime, a long, melodic, and entirely unnecessary tune. A long minute passed. Then the lock clicked a precise, electronic snick, and the door swung open. Veronica stood there. She was dressed for a luncheon, in a white linen dress, her blonde hair perfect. A bright, practiced smile was fixed on her face, ready for a delivery man or a neighbor. "Yes." "Can I?" Her voice, smooth as a salon advertisement, died in her throat. Her eyes went from me, whom she clearly didn't recognize for a second, to Graham, who looked like he owned the ground he stood on. Then her eyes fell on the envelope in his hand. The smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. "What is this?" she hissed. Before I could speak, Caleb's voice boomed from inside. "Who is it?" He appeared in the hallway behind her, a golf shirt on, a phone in his hand. He saw me. His face went through a rapid, ugly series of emotions: confusion, then irritation, then a theatrical, false wave of surprise. "Mom," he said, stepping forward, pushing past Veronica. "Mom, what are you doing here? We were so worried. We thought you were... Where did you go?" He was actually trying to play the part of the concerned son. He was going to try and gaslight me, right here on his front porch. The woman who had been dumped at the hotel would have crumpled. The woman who had been invisible in their basement would have looked at the ground. I was neither of those women anymore. I looked past him, at the expensive art on his wall, art I had paid for. "I'm here to get my name back." "Caleb," I said. My voice was low, and it did not shake. His face hardened. "What are you talking about? What is this?" Graham stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, a human shield made of expensive wool. "Mr. Hart, Ms. Hale, my name is Graham Whitlow. I am counsel for Eleanor Hart. We are here to serve you with a court order." He didn't hand the envelope to Caleb. He handed it to Veronica, who was closer. She took it as if it were a snake. This is a temporary restraining order, granted this morning by a judge in Cuyahoga County, Graham said, his voice a calm, professional monotone that cut through the humid air. It details a freeze on all assets held by the entity known as Hart Ridge LLC, pending a full evidentiary hearing. It also contains a discovery order. You have exactly 48 hours to produce every piece of financial documentation, every email, every text message, and every hard drive related to your management of Mrs. Hart's assets. Veronica's hands were shaking as she ripped the envelope. Her eyes scanned the first page. "This is insane," Caleb barked, puffing up. "You can't just—" "Brody said no one would check the ink," Veronica whispered, her voice cracking. She stopped, her eyes flying to Caleb's, wide with terror. She had said it. She had said it out loud. Graham, who had been holding his phone in his hand, angled down, discreetly clicked a button on the side. His coat pocket had a small, visible bulge from the digital recorder I knew was in there, perfectly legal to use when recording a conversation on a doorstep. Caleb's face went purple. You can't be on my property. Get off my property, security." He fumbled for his phone, the one he'd been holding all along. "I'm calling internal security." A young boy on a bicycle, perhaps 10 years old, pedaled past on the sidewalk behind us, his bell ringing. He waved. My instincts, honed over decades, kicked in. I smiled at him. A warm, genuine smile. The boy smiled back, oblivious, and rode on. My smile vanished as I turned back to my son. A moment later, a golf cart with a flashing yellow light pulled up to the curb. A man in a beige uniform stepped out, looking nervous. "Sir, what's the problem?" "These people are trespassing," Caleb shouted, jabbing a finger at us. "Remove them. Now." Graham turned to the guard and spoke with incredible, weary patience, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "Good morning. I am an officer of the court serving a legal summons and a valid TRO. This is a civil matter. It is not trespassing. If you choose to interfere, you will be obstructing a court order. Your name?" "Sir." The guard's eyes went wide. Sir, this is a legal matter. I can't get involved in that." He got back in his cart and drove off, leaving Caleb standing there, his mouth open. There was nothing left to say. We had delivered the bomb. Graham nodded curtly. "Mr. Hart. Ms. Hale. 48 hours. He turned, and I turned with him. We walked back down the curved path. As we reached the sidewalk, Graham paused and looked back. Not at them, but at the shiny, black smart lock on the front door. That lock. He called out, his voice sharp. "It's going to tell us their story." We got in the car. We didn't speak on the drive back to my new hotel. That night, I lay down in the clean, quiet room. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in more than 2 years, I slept without a single nightmare. I slept the entire night. The courtroom was cold. It was not a grand chamber like in the movies, but a small, functional, modern room, panelled in light-coloured wood that smelled faintly of lemon polish. At the front, on a raised platform, sat Judge Marla Keene. She was a woman in her 60s, like me. But there the similarity ended. She radiated an energy of absolute, weary authority. She did not smile. She did not waste words. Caleb and Veronica sat at the opposing table. They had a lawyer, a man in a pinstripe suit who looked agitated and expensive. My son and daughter-in-law were attempting to look indignant, but they just looked trapped. Mr. Whitlow, you filed this emergency motion, Judge Keene said, her voice like gravel. Proceed. Graham stood. His voice was calm, respectful, but it filled the room. Thank you, Your Honor. This is a simple matter of theft, packaged as a family dispute. We have submitted, as Exhibit A, the data logs from the defendant's own smart lock system. They allege my client, Mrs. Hart, was a guest in their home. These logs show her assigned basement door code was activated exactly 4 times in 30 days, all between the hours of 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. They contend she was free to leave. The data shows she was, effectively, a prisoner. Veronica shifted in her chair. Exhibit B, Graham continued, is video footage from a neighbour's hallway security camera, time-stamped May 17th. It clearly shows Mr. Hart directing movers as they remove my client's possessions from her apartment. This is relevant because the defense claims my client voluntarily decided to sell her home for tax purposes nearly a week after this footage was taken. Exhibit C bank statements for the shell entity, Hart Ridge LLC, managed by Ms. Hale. We see the deposit from the sale of my client's apartment. We then see, 6 days later, a disbursement of $185,000 to Mr. Hart's personal account. Caleb's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. We have the signed power of attorney Mrs. Hart voluntarily gave her son authorization. She is, unfortunately, confused. She agreed to the sale. My client was optimizing his mother's taxes, a loving act. Caleb even leaned forward, trying to look sincere. Mum agreed. I was just trying to help her. Graham waited for him to finish. The silence in the room was heavy. Your Honor, Graham said, addressing the judge but looking directly at my son. Let us, for a moment, accept the defendant's argument. Let's say Mrs. Hart, a 62-year-old former treasurer with a perfect financial record, agreed to sell her only primary asset for tax optimization. Then they must answer a very simple question. He paused, letting the room brace itself. Why did the money from that sale not go into Mrs. Hart's bank account? The silence was absolute. Caleb's lawyer looked at his legal pad. Veronica seemed to shrink. Why? Graham pressed, his voice dropping. Did it instead vanish into an LLC controlled by Ms. Hale, who then paid her husband a 6-figure fee if this was a voluntary transaction? Where is my client's money? Caleb looked like he had been struck. He had no answer. Finally, Your Honor, Graham said, turning back to the bench. We have submitted a preliminary affidavit from a certified handwriting expert. The signatures on the deed of transfer are not my client's. The signature on the power of attorney is not my client's. They are, in his professional opinion, simulated, forged. Judge Keene looked at Caleb. She looked at Veronica. She looked at their lawyer. Then she picked up her pen. The temporary restraining order is confirmed and shall remain in full effect, she declared, her voice final. All assets, accounts, and properties held by Hart Ridge LLC are frozen. The defendants are further enjoined from transferring or liquidating any personal assets in excess of $1,000. And counselor, she added, glaring at Caleb's lawyer. Given the extremely serious allegations regarding the notarization, I am issuing a supplementary order. Miles Brody is to surrender his original bound notary logbooks to this court by 9 a.m. tomorrow. She struck the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. We were in the hallway. The adrenaline drained from me, leaving my legs weak. Caleb and Veronica burst out of the courtroom, their lawyer muttering angrily. Graham stepped directly into Caleb's path. "Mr. Hart." My son stopped, his face flushed with rage. "That was your last chance to cooperate," Graham said, his voice quiet. "All the courtroom formality gone. The next time we are in court, we will be discussing the criminal charges. I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next." Veronica grabbed Caleb's arm. "Caleb, don't say anything. Let's go." They hurried to the far end of the wide, marble hall, near the elevators. Caleb ripped his arm free from her grasp and turned his back to us, shoving his phone against his ear. He was whispering, but the acoustics of the hall were unforgiving. His voice was a high, panicked hiss. "It all fell apart. Yes, she has a lawyer. They froze everything." A pause. Darren Cole, you have to fix this," Caleb pleaded, his voice cracking. "They know about Brody. The judge wants the logs. You have to fix this now." I watched this stranger, this man who was my son, begging an unknown person on the phone. I glanced at Graham. He was watching me, but a faint, thin smile was playing on his lips. It was a smile I had not seen before, and it was not a kind one. "Darren Cole," Graham murmured, almost to himself. "Do you know that name?" I asked. Graham's smile widened. "Oh, yes, I know Mr. Cole. I have been trying to get him into a deposition for 6 months on an entirely different, very large real estate fraud case." He looked from me back toward Caleb, who was now desperately punching numbers into his phone. "Your son just connected the two? The lines just crossed." The name Darren Cole was the key that unlocked a much larger, darker room. Graham's team, which I now understood was a small army of forensic accountants, paralegals, and digital investigators, fell on that name like wolves. What they found was not just a single fraudulent act against me, it was a business model. In 2 days, they had unspooled a chain of at least 5 other shell LLCs, all linked to Cole's primary investment firm. The victims were just like me, widows or elderly, all in their 60s and 70s, all living alone in valuable, mortgage-free properties in the greater Cleveland area. The pattern was identical. A notary named Miles Brody, a specific pair of real estate agents from the same brokerage, and in every single case, the money from the fraudulent sale was wired through a complex series of accounts within exactly 72 hours. Then, Sarah found the email. It was an internal document from Darren Cole's server, subpoenaed as part of Graham's other case. It was a memo to his team about a problematic acquisition. The last line was a protocol. If the asset is secured, it read, "Proceed immediately to the cleanup phase. Move the target out of state for a minimum of 72 hours. A clean break is essential." Graham read it aloud to me in his office. I had to sit down. 72 hours, I whispered. That's what they gave me. 3 days. Just long enough for the money to disappear. The plan wasn't just to abandon me in Charleston. It was a corporate policy. While his team followed the money, Graham looked for new leverage. He found it in Veronica. She was, it turned out, ambitious, not just in finance, but in society. She was on the junior board of a new, flashy local charity called Hearth and Harbour, a charity, ironically, dedicated to providing comfort for the elderly. Their website proudly listed Heart Ridge LLC as a community-first donor. She was building a public shield, Graham explained, scrolling through the website with open disgust. But a shield can be turned into a weapon. His team, digging through public filings, found something even better. Veronica is smart, but not as smart as she thinks, Graham said, sliding a document across his desk. She didn't trust your son any more than he trusted her. This is a post-nuptial agreement they signed last year. I want you to read paragraph 4. My eyes found the line. All civil liabilities incurred during the marriage, regardless of the originating party, shall be considered a shared responsibility. She's tied to him, I said. She's welded to him, Graham corrected. If Caleb goes down for this, she goes down. She can't cut him loose and blame it all on the grieving son. She has no choice but to cooperate or drown with him. The pieces were falling into place so fast. It was dizzying. Mrs. Duffy, my neighbour, called Graham's office, giddy with new information. She had reviewed more of her doorbell footage. I have another video she announced over the speakerphone. From the day they moved Eleanor out. It's Caleb. By himself. This time. He's carrying a specific box. I know it was hers. It was that old floral box she kept in the closet. Graham paused. Eleanor. What was in that box? My blood ran cold. My medical records. Decades of them. My late husband's. 2 files. Prescription histories. Doctor's notes. Graham closed his eyes, his face a mask of cold fury. They weren't just taking your assets, Eleanor. They were stealing your past to build a case for your future. They were going to have you declared incompetent. The final, devastating pieces came from opposite ends of the technological spectrum. One from my own hand, one from the digital ether. Graham's team, executing a discovery warrant, had seized the contents of a storage unit Caleb and Veronica kept. Among the boxes of old ski equipment and out-of-season clothes was a single, mislabeled box from my apartment. It was filled with junk, but at the bottom, beneath old tax returns, was my handwritten daily planner, my old life. And on the page for May 12th, 2 years ago, in my own neat treasurer's script, I had written Caleb here at 4 p.m., brought papers to sign, seemed in a hurry, said it was for taxes. It was the proof, my own voice from the past, confirming the timeline. Simultaneously, the digital forensics expert Graham had hired delivered his report. He had recovered the original, uncorrupted PDF of the power of attorney from Miles Brody's seized server. The file's metadata, its digital fingerprint, told the whole story. It had not been created on my computer. It had been created and modified on a machine registered to Miles Brody, and buried deep in the document's hidden comment history, accessible only to an expert, was a single, tagged note. A note added by a user named V. Hale 2 days before I signed. The note contained 2 words. Make it clean. Graham laid the report on his desk next to my diary. And there we have it, he said quietly. We have the forgery. We have the co-conspirators. We have the financial trail. We have the digital proof. And we have the motive. This is more than a civil suit. Eleanor, this is a criminal indictment, gift-wrapped, and I know exactly when to deliver it. The gala for Hearth and Harbour was held in a restored bank, all marble columns and towering ceilings. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the sound of clinking glasses. Men and women in tuxedos and silk gowns wrote checks, their faces glowing with the self-satisfaction of public virtue. And at the centre of it, co-chairing the event, was Veronica. She was on a small stage, her blonde hair swept up, a microphone in her hand. She looked radiant, untouchable, as she spoke about our duty to those who built this city and the dignity of our seniors. I stood near the back, by one of the columns. I was not hiding. I was her guest, in a way. Graham, whose law firm had bought a table, had escorted me in on his arm. I wore a simple, dark dress. I was not an interloper. I was an attendee. Caleb was there, hovering near the stage, his face a mask of supportive pride. He looked like the perfect husband, the dutiful son-in-law. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor, took the stage. And now, let's give another round of applause to Veronica Hale, whose heart for the elderly is truly an inspiration. As the applause died down, Graham, who had been standing near the front, raised his hand. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the polite murmur. The news anchor, surprised, looked at him. I wonder if I might say just a few words. As a guest, I am deeply moved by this evening's theme. He was handed the microphone. He was known in this city. He was given the courtesy. "Thank you," Graham said, his voice now booming through the speakers. It is inspiring to be in a room so dedicated to protecting the vulnerable, which makes it all the more urgent that we, as a community, are aware of the sophisticated predators who use that very vulnerability against them. The room went quiet. Veronica's smile became fixed. There is a model of abuse, a business plan, that is active in our city. Graham continued, his voice calm, as if discussing stock market trends. It targets seniors living alone. It uses fraudulent notarizations and shell LLCs to steal their homes. It relies on a clean-up phase, a particularly grotesque term where the victim is transported out of state, often for 72 hours, while the money is laundered and disappears. It is a model that turns a life's work into a predator's profit in under a week. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He didn't have to. A ripple of murmuring went through the crowd. I watched Veronica. She was still smiling, but the smile was a rictus. A single bead of sweat traced a line from her perfect hairline down her temple, cutting a path through her foundation. From my vantage point, I saw Caleb's reaction. It was not anger. It was pure, unadulterated panic. He didn't look at Veronica. He didn't look at Graham. He turned and bolted, pushing his way through a velvet curtain that led to the backstage service area. I saw him pull out his phone, his fingers jabbing at the screen. He put it to his ear, his back to the wall, his shoulders hiked up in terror. He was calling Darren Cole. I knew it. On stage, Graham concluded. Thank you for indulging me. Let's all be vigilant. He handed the microphone back and walked off the stage to a stunned, confused silence. As he reached the floor, two men in quiet, conservative suits entered the ballroom from the main door. They were not guests. They moved with purpose, scanning the room and finding Graham. He gave them a nearly imperceptible nod. The men walked directly to the stage, where Veronica was still frozen. They intercepted Caleb as he burst back out from behind the curtain, his face ashen. "Ms. Hail, Mr. Hart," the lead man said, his voice quiet but impossible to ignore. "My name is Assistant District Attorney Martin. We have a few questions for you. We have a car waiting. Perhaps we could have a private conversation." This was the moment. The public humiliation. The collapse. Caleb looked like he was going to be sick. But Veronica... I saw the exact second she made the calculation. The post-nuptial. The bank records. The shared liability. She turned to the ADA, her voice a desperate, sibilant whisper. It was Brody. It was all him. I have his letters. I have proof. I will cooperate. Caleb's head snapped toward her. The look of betrayal on his face was absolute. He had been her partner in the crime, and now he was her liability. I did not watch them. I did not want to see my son's face. Instead, I looked up. Above the restored bank's ceiling was a massive, glittering chandelier, each crystal refracting the light. But I was not seeing it. I was seeing the cracks in the ceiling of my old apartment, the water stain that looked like a map of a country I didn't know. I felt a presence beside me. It was Graham. He was holding his phone, the screen bright. The storm just formed. Eleanor, he whispered. He held the phone up so I could see the email he was writing. It was to the district attorney. Subject arrest and proffer. Martin has them. The body read, Brody is the linchpin. I recommend an immediate arrest warrant. Proffer a plea deal to Ms. Hale in exchange for her full testimony against Cole. Heart is just the muscle. He hit send. The storm was no longer forming. It was about to break. The dominoes fell with a speed that was almost clinical. Darren Cole, facing an avalanche of evidence from Graham's original lawsuit and the new charges I had brought, pleaded guilty to racketeering. Miles Brody was a footnote. We saw him in the main hallway of the courthouse, his face grey and slack, being led away in handcuffs. His own logbooks, surrendered to the court, had been his confession. Veronica, in a calculated move to save herself, had signed a detailed, sworn affidavit. She turned over every piece of correspondence. She confirmed the existence of the 72-hour operation to abandon me in Charleston, and she confirmed that the signature on the deed was not mine, but a forgery she had witnessed Brody create. Our final day in court was not a trial. It was a formality. We were back in front of Judge Keene. Caleb and his lawyer were there, but the fight had gone out of them. Graham stood, his voice holding not triumph, but a cold, hard finality. He laid out the case, not as a story, but as a mathematical proof. Your Honor, the defense claims this was a confused family matter. The evidence proves it was a calculated financial crime, he said. He pointed to the exhibits. Here are the smart lock logs, showing Mrs. Hart's confinement. Here is the metadata from the forged power of attorney created on Mr. Brody's computer, with the digital note, make it clean, attached by Ms. Hale. Here are the bank statements, showing the $185,000 payment from the Shell LLC to Mr. Hart. And here is the sworn testimony of the co-conspirator. Every link in the chain is accounted for. Caleb's lawyer, looking pale, tried to object, but Caleb himself suddenly stood up, pushing him aside. Your Honor, please, he said, his voice cracking, attempting emotion. She's my mother. I love my mother. I was only trying to protect her. She's been confused lately. Judge Keene held up a hand. The sound in the courtroom stopped. Mr. Hart, she said, her voice like ice. I am not interested in your performance. This court is interested in the evidence. Do you have any evidence to refute the metadata? Do you have any evidence to explain the bank transfers, other than theft? Caleb stood there, his mouth opening and closing. He had nothing. The verdict was absolute. Judge Keene declared the sale of my apartment null and void. The title was to be restored to me immediately. She awarded me the full market value of the home, in addition to significant punitive damages. Finally. She looked at the assistant district attorney, who was present in the room. This court refers the matter of Mr. Caleb Hart to your office for immediate criminal prosecution on charges of forgery, felony fraud, and elder abuse. A gasp went up from the small gallery, but Graham was already moving. He slid 2 documents in front of me, right there at the plaintiff's table, along with his own pen. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "This first document officially restores your name and full authority over all your financial accounts. This second one is a permanent restraining order for 10 years. He cannot come within 500 feet of you, your home, or your bank. Sign here." My hand, which had shaken so violently in that coffee shop, was steady. I signed my name, looping the E and the H with a firm, clear stroke. As I finished, Caleb walked past our table, flanked by his lawyer. He was pale. He stopped, just for a second, and looked at me. His face was a ruin of desperation. "Mum," he whispered. I looked up from the paper I had just signed. My gaze was level. "My name is Eleanor Hart." We walked out of the heavy courtroom doors and into the bright sunlight of the courthouse steps. It was a media circus. Reporters, alerted by the Cole and Brody arrests, swarmed us. Microphones were shoved in my face. "Mrs. Hart, how do you feel?" "Mr. Whitlow, what did the judge say?" Graham put a protective arm on my shoulder and guided me through the crowd. He stopped for only a moment, his voice rising above the din. "There will be no comment on the criminal proceedings," he said forcefully. "But understand this. What happened today was not just a legal victory. It was the victory of a courageous woman who refused to be erased." He got me to his car, which was waiting at the curb. As I reached for the door, my hand brushed against the pocket of my coat. Inside, I still carried the wallet. Graham's wallet. I had tried to give it back to him, but he had insisted I keep it. A reminder, Eleanor, of what you're capable of. I opened it in the quiet of the car. He had had the soft leather flap on the inside engraved. The words were small, elegant. "For the day you chose dignity, that afternoon." Graham gave me the keys. My keys. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my old apartment. I put the key in the lock. It stuck for a moment, then turned. I pushed the door open. The air was stale, and my furniture was gone, sold or stolen. But the sunlight, the specific, golden, late afternoon Cleveland sunlight, was exactly as I remembered. It was my sunlight. I walked to the mantelpiece and, from my purse, took the small, framed photo of my late husband. I placed it back in its proper spot. I stood there in the center of the empty room, looking at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. The knot in my chest, the one I had carried since that day in Charleston, finally came undone. I had my home. I had my name. I had my voice. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and please hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.